Of Apples and Magic by Legion of Pony. Of apple fields to be sowed. After partying for a long while, with many toasts being held in their honor, and many more words of wisdom shared, Twilight and Applejack finally departed from the party to the cheers of their guests, with her married friends looking on as she went into the carriage and it was led away. "You know, they're totally gonna bone each other tonight, right?" Rainbow asked, as they watched the carriage head to the train station, getting a chuckle from all the others. "Of course," Kaden said mischievously. "That's what the honeymoon is for, after all." "Ah, thanks, Celestia is over," Applejack said, tossing off her fancy gown as though it were muddy clothing, strolling it across the bedroom of their hotel in Las Pegasus. Their trip prepaid by Twilight's parents. They were glad here was chosen for their honeymoon, with it a place to have fun and unwind, just what the two needed after the week of pure stress before their wedding. "I still can't believe we had to go through all that just to get married. I mean, for Pete's sake, we could have just gone hitched at some little place instead of that big old gaudy thing," Applejack said, going and laying on the bed with a pleased grunt. Twilight giggled. "Well, we did what we had to do, and the result was the same either way. We're married now, Applejack. We're forever one, and no pony can ever change that," Twilight said, having taken her own dress off and neatly hanging it in the closet, alongside grabbing Applejack's off of the floor and doing the same. As she sighed happily at that thought of forever being Applejack's, and Applejack being hers, she lay down beside her mate, meeting her lips with Applejack's in an intimate kiss. Applejack didn't put up any resistance whatsoever to Twilight's advances, only giving a quiet, pleased moan as Twilight's tongue slipped past her relaxed jaw, quickly meeting her own. What followed was a brief tangle of tongues, fighting not against each other, but instead working to bring its partner in dance as much pleasure as possible. It only heated up more as Twilight rolled over on top of Applejack, feeling her wife go slack underneath her, letting her take over as her tongue softly pinned Applejack's to the bottom of her mouth, though they both won in this tussle. After a while, Twilight pulled out of her mouth with a smack of their lips, both still staring into each other's eyes, Amethyst staring into Emerald once more. "Twi, can you take the spell off now? I'm way more than ready," Applejack said, her voice more than lustful. "I need you so bad. I've needed you since it first started." Twilight lit her horn, and a moment later, Applejack moaned as the unpleasant, heated feeling in her belly lit like a pyre from ashes, her urges swelling from passive want to desperate need. Hey, maybe I should have had you leave the spell on for a little longer. I almost forgot how horrible being in heat is," Applejack moaned, her hoof immediately trailing down her belly as she started to rub her swelling, moistening slit on reflex, giving a quiet whimper at the pleasure the contact caused. "Listen, Applejack, I didn't want to use the spell on you to any more than you wanted me to, but it had to be done if you wanted to keep loyal to your promise to yourself and your parents. I know you didn't plan on going into heat a couple of days early, let alone at the last days of our wedding preparation, but I couldn't take you having your full after marriage away from you," Twilight said, gently nudging Applejack's rubbing hoof aside with her own and taking it over, earning a louder moan from Applejack as her slit winked, her hips humping up into the hoof of her lover. "Yeah, I know I need it, but, wish I could have given yourself a cock and rubbed me right then when I first went in my heat, right in the middle of that whole big group of ponies," Applejack said, remembering they had been in the middle of a planning meeting with Celestia and a few planners when Applejack had asked Twilight out to the hallway, with the scent of a heated mare more than obvious by the time they had entered the hall. Twilight had planned to use the heat-quelling spell as a temporary band-aid to fix her heat during the meeting, but Applejack and she had been so busy that the spell had to remain on constantly, her having to endure the mental torture of not being able to sate herself with her hooves for 2 days due to Twilight being constantly busy or both being exhausted. Applejack was ready to be rutted like a mare in her first heat, and Twilight was only too willing to do so. "Applejack, you know that wouldn't have ended well. Not only would you have gotten pregnant before we got married, but you would have embarrassed yourself in front of the princesses. Applejack only huffed. I don't care. I know the princesses go into heat still, even at their age, so I know they know what bad heats feel like. She paused, giving an extended moan, as Twilight started to rub her winking clit with a hoof, her whole crotch now saturated with her fluids, even going so far as to give low gushes of it out of her and onto the bed and her tail, also while coating her lover's hoof in her honey. Wow, you must have had it bad if you're even squirting, Twilight observed, keeping the rubs firm and going deeper, parting her mare's lips with her hoof as it tried to suck it inside. Of course I've had bad, sweets. You've never not been able to rub yourself much in your heat for near 3 days, while your mind's telling you to grind yourself against anything that looks even kinda hard? Applejack asked, her tone a mix between frustrated and pleasured. Twy, your hoof ain't enough this time. I need your tongue or your cock, I don't care which. Applejack virtually begged, giving her a squirt as she waited for Applejack to sate her. Twilight nodded and quickly positioned herself in the 69 position as Applejack lay on her side, and Twilight did as well, aligning their crotches to each other as Twilight immediately dug in, pressing her muzzle tightly into Applejack's winking slit. Applejack let out a carnal growl of pleasure as she felt Twilight going down on her like she had during Twilight's own heat last month, making Applejack's mind blank as she started rubbing her clit with her magic alongside making her tongue plunge as deeply as possible, her fluids spraying on her lover's face and coating it with her lust. Applejack did her best to lick Twilight's slit, but each time she tried, another intense pang of pleasure rolled through her, as Twilight rubbed her clit with each rapid wink, making Applejack jerk in pleasure at that powerful stimulation. It was only a minute of the intense, unrelenting licking and rubbing that Applejack tensed up and cried out as she was overtaken by a very intense orgasm, her fluids gushing out of her onto the bed, moaning like she had stubbed her hoof. Twilight knew very well that pain wasn't the reason Applejack was moaning, however, feeling her winking constantly as she clearly came hard, her powerful inner muscles sucking on her muzzle as though to draw it inside. Nearly a minute of constant pleasure that turned out to be 2 orgasms head-to-head, with Twilight not having relented much even as she felt Applejack in her throes of release. Applejack finally relaxed a bit as her body flushed with the warm satisfaction of orgasm, her desperate need quelling for a moment and letting Applejack feel the first semblance of relief that she had felt in the past 2 days. But still, she felt that passive need for more, even as she recovered from 2 intense orgasms in a chain. The need for a mate's seed. Wow, sugar, your tongue's just as good as I remembered, Applejack said in a dazed tone, softly panting as she recovered from her minute on cloud 9. Knowing that Twilight was almost as worked up as she was now, watching Twilight's marehood winking slowly at her, calling to her to continue her earlier attention to it, Applejack continued to lick deeply, but slowly, being treated to very pleased moans from her lover. She knew that she needed Twilight more, needing her to rot her senseless and cure her heat the old-fashioned way. But she also knew how unfair it was to be left wanting. She had been left needing Twilight's intimate touch for over 3 days, after all. Applejack continued to make out with her wife's lower lips, feeling them occasionally squeeze on her tongue, that, paired with her winking and pleasured moans, telling Applejack she was right, on track. After a while of gentle licks, Applejack curved her tongue upward, finding that small, spongy patch of flesh inside of Twilight, then felt her tense up and moan even louder, feeling a flurry of winks kissing her nose as Applejack licked her G-spot, the farm pony's hoof softly rubbing her wife's cutie mark. As she felt the squeezes grow more rapid and felt Twilight tensing up some time later, hearing her moans and gasps rising a pitch as Applejack continued to rub that most sensitive spot. She heard as her mate cried out and grabbed around her head with her back legs, keeping her buried deep into her orgasming slit. Her hips rocked against her for a good while, Twilight riding out a rather nice orgasm as her fluids oozed out around Applejack's muzzle and onto the bed. Twilight slowly relaxed, letting out a very satisfied coo as Applejack gently pulled out of her and instead gave her a stiff little kiss. As Twilight rested in her afterglow, Applejack's breeding urges kicked in again as she nuzzled her muzzle into Twilight's own, earning a soft flick on the nose from her and making her shudder. "Well, we both know that oral will only be a temporary relief for your heat, as will hooves," Twilight explained, her eyes lidding at the implications, feeling Applejack wink against her once more, rubbing hoof in anticipation. "You're right. If you don't mind, could we move right along to you running my brains out? It'll be much appreciated," Applejack said as she felt the burning in her belly resume even after her double orgasm, knowing only a stallion's seed could satisfy it fully and permanently. "I'm ready to have your full now, Twilight. My wife. My love." Twilight soon stood and her horn lit, feeling the familiar stretching in her lower belly as well as the familiar masculine guess taking residence in her mind soon after. While Applejack moved from underneath her and lay on the side of the bed with her croup on the edge, leaving herself prone on her back. Twilight felt as she grew the penis and balls that would indeed give Applejack her full, shuddering as her new instincts picked up on the fertile scent of her mare and making the length start to snake out before it had even been fully formed. Keeping her concentration on the spell despite the growing cloud of lust in her mind, Twilight kissed her mare as she stood, then again laid over her, pitting her down softly into the mattress as the spell finished, and left her endowed with stallionhood once more. She felt it grinding against Applejack's lower belly as she softly thrust her hips on reflex to Applejack's pheromones flowing through her now, calling her to breed her fertile mare, to fill her with her seed so that she could later watch her belly later swell with a foal. Her foal. "Come on, Twilight, breathe me. Knock me up with your foal. I've wanted to feel your baby making come in me ever since we first did this during my heat, and every time you run at me with the safe spell. But I couldn't let myself get pregnant until we were married. But now we are. You're mine forever, and I'm yours," Applejack proudly stated. "My love, I want you to rut me till you can't come no more." Applejack then felt as Twilight's member very quickly hardened and pressed into her lower belly and teats as she lay atop her, feeling her hips grinding against her and letting the heated mare feel every of its 8 inches throbbing between the two, feeling the pre-cum it was producing en masse matting her fur. "I want all of your hot full batter in my oven and making a bun." Twilight snickered and then responded to her mare's desire as well as her own by sliding her hips back and pressing her flare against her very wanting mare's marehood, feeling it winking against her and giving her swollen head kisses in the only way it could. Without any further teasing, Twilight slid fully into her mare, feeling all at once embraced by her warm insides as she easily hilted within seconds, feeling Applejack's slightly dilated cervix kissing her glands now, her whole well-lubed passage welcoming her in and milking her for her sperm already, her lips and clit winking against her pelvis. In response to the stimulation, Twilight quickly pulled out and plunged back in, getting a very deep moan from Applejack. Twilight herself gave a hearty breathing whinny as she claimed this fertile mare as her own, hers to plant her seed in and make grow ripe with foal. "That's right, Twilight. I'm all yours," Applejack encouraged, her whole body tingling with the pleasure of being bred in heat, with the promise of getting a foal this time making it feel just that much better. Just don't stop humping, and don't you dare pull out at the end." Twilight was only too eager to fulfill her mare's demand, her hips rocking on their instinctive path, their chests grinding together as Twilight continued to thrust. It wasn't long until Applejack wrapped her forelegs around Twilight's crest and pulled her tightly to her muzzle, meeting her lips in a kiss as her tongue snaked inside. Twilight gave no resistance as she kept riding her wife, her hips working on instinct as she bred, her whole body overwhelmed with pleasure. And even more so when Applejack's tongue dueled with her own, sending another snake of pleasure to join the constant stream burning through her being. "Yeah, Twilight, just like that. Harder," Applejack encouraged, and the increased pats to their soaked crotches meeting together. The slap of Twilight's balls meeting her flank was her reward. Twilight could feel Applejack's passage rippling over her on uncontrollable reflex to the stallionhood deep within her. encouraging her stallion to come inside her, both of their mind awash with the sensations. For what seemed an eternity, Twilight kept rutting at a rapid pace before suddenly hearing Applejack give a whimper. "Twilight, I... Applejack squealed, with Twilight then feeling her insides clamping down on her cock and keeping it tight inside of her as she came again. Twilight was forced to stop dead inside of her as she tightly kneaded her length, her body trying desperately to bring her stallion to climax with her, then draw his seed deep within her. She held her own orgasm off, though, even as she felt herself starting to flare in reaction to being gripped so tightly and milked, wanting to make this honeymoon one they would always remember. As soon as Applejack loosened up enough for her to move again, Twilight kept her hips rolling smoothly, earning another pleased moan and deep kiss from her mare. The extra thick, extra slippery wetness that Applejack's release had left only made her deep thrust that much deeper and more fluid, letting Twilight sink balls deep with each and making Applejack feel her against her deepest barrier with each hilting, making her lust-addled mind realize that her request for Twilight to come directly into her womb wasn't as far-fetched as she had thought. Twilight, you're doing perfect. It feels so good," Applejack cooed down, feeling herself approaching her third orgasm, also feeling Twilight growing larger in her, knowing it wouldn't be too long before Twilight also reached her own limit if she was starting to flare. As she thought more about that sensation deep within her, of her passage being spread wide to keep all of Twilight's cum deep inside of her, its sole purpose to make a seal against her cervix, to make sure all of her wife's lovely sperm went into her womb and got her pregnant, knowing nothing would be done to prevent that this time, Applejack felt her third climax closing in. Applejack, I don't think I can last. I'm gonna... soon," Twilight stumbled out, her body starting to tense as she felt Applejack growing tighter with each thrust, knowing by the almost unbearable tightness in her pelvis that she was on the brink. Applejack fell as Twilight flared fully and her thrusts grew rapid and non-rhythmic, her flare spreading her inmost passage taut and her length pulsing heavily, knowing she was on the edge. "Do it! I love you, Twi! Make me a mama!" Applejack passionately whispered, and with that, Twilight slammed home and whinnied. Knowing this was what they both wanted, Twilight came while hilted inside of her love, instantly being overwhelmed by a huge wave of pleasure that made her whine out loud, biting Applejack's neck softly and seeking a crest to hold that simply wasn't there. It was wonderful and horrible at the same time, as orgasm always was for her. She felt herself completely out of control of herself as her hips sharply hilted her inside of Applejack. Then felt as her hips jerked out and back in again, each one preceded by a huge gush of thick, very virile cum for her. The large flare giving her full batter nowhere to go but up and into Applejack's oven. As Applejack felt that very specific hot, thick, wet feeling deep inside of her, and thought of implication it brought with it. Knowing this was real, virile seed instead of the sterile semen she and Twilight had used before, she cried out and wrapped all four hooves around Twilight, holding the mare she so loved tightly to her at that penultimate moment, pressing her lips tightly to her life mates as they came together and undoubtedly conceived their child. Her pleasure washed over her in a tsunami. Anything close to a sentient thought flushed out with pure, primal satisfaction. For so long they came together, Applejack feeling as that warmth pulsing and spreading deep into her belly overwhelmed the previous heat, dousing her estrus and making her whole body cry in joy at that sensation. Her breathing instincts overjoyed at the sensation of a foal being pumped into her. Twilight only gave a couple of last weak humps before remaining hilted again, after what felt like forever, but couldn't have been more than a minute, with Applejack feeling completely, contentedly filled up, and her body utterly satisfied. Twilight finally stopped pulsing within her. She remained deep within Applejack on instinct, her flare pressed against her deepest wall and plugging it to keep her seed within her, so her little swimmers could reach their own goal of her egg. After she had given her last, Twilight collapsed into her love, pressing her into the mattress and giving her the feeling of light submission that Applejack believed every mare should have after being bred. "Well, that was certainly the hardest I've ever come," Applejack said, even still feeling twinges and aftershocks of her orgasm rolling through her, even sometimes leading to full-on contractions on Twilight's still buried dick, earning a moan from her and a pulse from her stallionhood. I ejaculated my semen directly into your uterus during our estrus," Twilight said, feeling a certain pride at such a fact. "If that doesn't give you our full, I don't know what will." Twilight then gazed into her wife's eyes, seeing them smoldering with her love for her, knowing her own eyes burned with the same passion as well. She loved Applejack with all of her heart, and knew she did the same, so much so that she was willing to bear her child. "I love you so much." "I love you too, Twilight Sparkle," Applejack said, before meeting Twilight's lips in a much softer kiss this time, their lips softly smacking as they kissed lovingly, with Twilight still buried to Applejack's core. "I get to have a foal," Applejack said proudly, a hoof reaching down to rub the side of her lower belly. "I get to have our kin. I've always wanted to carry a foal of my own, and thanks to you, I can do just that." Twilight smiled as the undoubted aftermath of their breeding once more came to her mind. She and Applejack were going to have a foal. A lovely, beautiful foal that was a little part of both of them. "I know carrying a foal and having a family is just as important to an apple as farming, and I'm just glad you chose me to give it to you. Hey, I can see why those two mares wanted to have a foal together so badly that they invented a whole new type of magic for it," Twilight nearly whispered, nuzzling into Applejack's mane. If it felt anywhere near as lovely and satisfying for them to know they were having a foal together with the mare they love as it does for me, I'll move the planet just to make it happen. After that, they simply snuggled for a while, being as close to one pony as possible, kissing or nipping affectionately while they rested, admiring each other's presence. After a while, Applejack felt that faint burning of her heat returning, knowing it would likely keep coming back for a while until the sperm took, and she was impregnated. Twilight was still rock hard from the constant, gentle kneading Applejack's vaginal muscles kept up on reflex, urging the stallion inside of her to go another round. "Hey, Twilight, you think we can go again? I'm more than ready." Twilight only grinned. "Want to do it pony style this time?" "Yeah, bet your flanks I do." The night was still young, and Applejack was still very much in the heat, something Twilight resolved to quell again and again.